inside and outside the lines of the field and the walls of the stadium. We are people and planet champions.
Welcome back to the People and Planet Champions podcast. I'm your host, Alex Meacham.
And I'm Roger McClendon.
Our special guest is Chris Dickerson. Chris is originally from Los Angeles, California, and played Major League Baseball for 8 seasons, played for the Reds, the Brewers, Yankees, Orioles, Indians. He is currently the founder of Players for the Planet, an organization uniting athletes for global change. Chris is very accomplished as an athlete, but his mission for global change is far more impressive. I'd like to welcome in our guest for the People and Planet Champions podcast, Chris Dickerson. What's going on, Chris?
What's happening? Big Raj.
What's up, Chris?
Big Raj in the house. Always good to see Big Raj.
Absolutely, Chris. Good to see you again.
Hey, Raj. It's Thanksgiving weekend. Can we change up the Thanksgiving GIFs this year? You got to step it up. You got to step it up this year.
No problem. I'll go into the archives.
That old. Yeah, you got to go to the archives, man. You can't. It's 2025. You can't be sending me that Microsoft clip art turkey anymore.
I'll check with Alex, man. He'll have something for me to update me.
Hey, we haven't even started and shots are fired. I like where this is going. Now, Chris, you made your Major League debut with the Cincinnati Reds. You hit your first home run in the league for the Reds, my hometown and my favorite team. Any good memories playing for the Cincinnati Reds and living in Cincinnati?
Yeah, I mean, I often explain it. It's Cincinnati will always be, a part of my life. It'll always be, family. Just going back there, I was drafted by the Reds, and to get to the big leagues with the team that drafted you is always special. But particularly coming up, I was very fortunate to come up with some great guys. Joey and I came up all the way through the system together. Ryan Hannigan, Paul Yanish, who I did my Reds podcast with last year. So there's always have a great affinity for Cincinnati. I loved being downtown. I was full stop. I was full go with my sustainability mission. So I love riding my bike from downtown, from 4th Street to the field every day. It was a great place, and a place that always hold near and dear to my heart. But first at bat in first major league at bat, first start in Pittsburgh, and then being able to come home and have my mom see my first home run in Cincinnati against St. Louis is super special.
That's awesome. So you lived downtown the entire time you're with the Reds?
Yeah. All three years, I had these great loft apartments down there, and me and Ryan Hannigan were neighbors right across from each other. It was great. It was right over there by First Watch. The great breakfast spot. That was our go-to breakfast spot every day. But just be able to have walking distance, and that was before I was in New York. But I being from LA, I've never been downtown and be able to, have that, that like real neighborhood, that real downtown neighborhood where you walk over to your local bagel shop, your coffee spot, walk over to breakfast, or, you got your hidden bar. We had that jazz club, the Blue Wisp, was right down the street. Yeah, I don't know if anybody knows about the Blue Wisp. The Blue Wisp is sneaky. You roll in there after games, and it's just like a super like old school jazz vibe. But downtown Cincinnati is like a time warp.
Yeah.
You walk down some of those streets and you're like, bro, where am I? I'm like in 1956. Like, I got this jazz club, and there's there's a dude, like a three-man ensemble, with the saxophone and the bass guitar, and you're going down, and you're looking at these suits from 1957 with the crazy hats. Roger knows. He's like, that's most of the stories is like black folk church wear.
Absolutely. Well, there's a lot of history in Cincinnati, right there by the Mason-Dixon line, and you talk about the Big Red Machine, and for me, and again, this is what connects us all between Alex, myself, Chris, with this experience. I came to Cincinnati back in the mid '80s, and the same thing. It was this feeling of, wow, this is a different place. It's a different place. I came from the East Coast, and but it has so much rich history, And you think about the guys that I watched from, when I was a kid, the Big Red Machine, Pete Rose, Griffey, Concepcion, Johnny Bench behind the plate. I mean, it was just a powerful machine with, Sparky Anderson as the coach. And then to see it.
Forget Joe Morgan.
Joe Morgan, the second baseman. I can't forget all those guys. Geronimo, Cesar Geronimo, all those guys there. And then to see it come back as me as a Bearcat in Cincinnati, and then watch the Reds kind of mature, try to get back to that. You were a part of that. Talk about Eric Davis and some other folks that came as you were coming through. But it's good to see you, man. It's good to know that rich history is there. And like we're saying, it's bigger than baseball. Some of the things that you were able to learn and grow coming into Cincinnati. Talk about that. Like, how did you start to take your values and what you learned, on the West Coast to come into a Midwestern town? You know what I'm saying? That maybe wasn't as progressive in certain areas, and how did you influence them with your values?
Yeah, so there's, that goes on two sides, and I think the three of us can admit that, we talk about like progressive values, and there is still a rich history. It is being on the board of the Mason-Dixon line. When you get in Kentucky, you have that Southern influence, and so there is, we've had a number of different stories. I think one of them is, the Brandon Phillips situation where, when he got pulled over and they didn't believe that he lived in a nice house. So there's a lot of kind of like racial undertones in Cincinnati that we dealt with. And that was one of those things that was, one of those things where those OGs like Eric, like Hatcher, Dusty, they're just like, be careful. Like, you might think that you're somebody, but when you're not on TV, it's a whole different ball game. You still got to be careful of how you operate, how you carry yourself. But, that aside, I credit everything to the Reds with the advancement of Players for the Planet, 100%. They were amazing. You talk about reusable bag night, the seventh inning recycling stretch, which they, that we started there. The e-waste events, the education programs, the reading programs about climate, about environmentalism. So they were so welcoming of the movement. And this was right around the time that they were really starting to progress too. They were looking to try some things themselves with the compost and the reuse of, the turf, and be able to compost that and put it into surrounding fields. Really taking, really focusing on, the recycling aspect and doing, with Rumpke Recycling coming in as a partner, and they've been a tremendous partner for years. And then just seeing the response with the e-waste was was all my all-time favorite of all the stuff that we've done. We've done tree planting in, Seattle. We've done the All-Star game in Atlanta. We've done urban gardens. We've done, we've done the cleanups in Dominican. We've done cleanups in Puerto Rico with Francisco Lindor. But those e-waste recycling in Cincinnati were all time. Mount Adams, what's it, Anderson Township. To see the city unite, and I think that was the first time it's like being removed. And you're like, okay, this is something I care about. Let's, how can we get the fans to get on board with recycling? How can we educate young fans within the Reds youth partners? But seeing the power of sports bringing everybody together, and whether it is a little bit of incentive, like, hey, come out and get 2 free tickets. The fact of the matter, using the platform of sports requires people to look at themselves and be like, oh wow, you know what? I do use a lot of this crap. I can get rid of a lot of this. I don't really need a lot of this. And then, and with that being said, in turn, you become educated, and that becomes something that becomes long lasting. So doing those e-waste, it's like, all right, I have this old TV and this old DVD player and this old VHS and this old printer, old hard drive, all this stuff that I do not know what to do with. Now I know that there are ways to dispose of this responsibly, but also looking at like the global issue of electronic waste
Yeah.
was a huge,
Yeah.
becomes a huge thing. Like I would have never known this unless it was, this was a Reds and Players for the Planet program. But having that
Yep.
interaction, be able to come out and personally like unload the fans' cars with their old, with their old printers
Mhm.
and stuff we haven't seen in like 20 years, like
Yeah.
old flip phones.
Let me jump in. Let me jump in
The
here,
big,
Chris. Let
yeah,
me jump in. Yeah, yeah. So this has been, your journey, I think, has been amazing because I think you were one of the first to do that. And you think about MLB teams and where Cincinnati at the time that you actually implemented your first idea, it started small and then it grew to all this, right? And so I think for the listeners out there, as they hear, the journey that you're on, they don't know how difficult it was when you really first started, like when you were really in the locker room. And I'll pass it to Alex too to kind of get back on track. But yeah, Alex, go.
Well, I think that's a great point because let's take it back even further because I think your journey early on impacts a lot of things you're talking about now because just kind of doing a little bit of research, and correct me if I'm wrong, Chris, but I feel like before you were an athlete, before you were a baseball player, you were really an environmentalist before all of that. So can you take us back to growing up in LA and what that was like and how that impacted you?
yeah. And with that being said, it's crazy because we had Taylor on here, my daughter, and Roger knows is like we're all environmentalists when we're kids, like, and I think that was the biggest change in the narrative is like when players started to get kids, they started to see the world through kids' eyes. But as a kid, you're in LA, you're going to the beach, you're surfing, you're boogie boarding, you're outside skateboarding, you're on a bike, you're playing baseball, baseball leagues. But for me, like, we had friends that were getting really sick because of toxic runoff in Malibu and because of, the amount of waste and pollution that's washed off, during the rainy season, the rainy season or after rain into the ocean. My dad was a big recycler. He put together this makeshift recycling sorting section, and so he put it together with PVC pipes, and we had one section for glass, one section for plastic, and then California, being progressive, had the yellow bins for old newspaper, and then like our regular waste stream. So understanding why it's important to recycle was that kind of introduction into our personal responsibility to do better was from my dad. But then going on field trips and going on field trips to the zoo or to these nature preserves and understanding how the human impact on the natural environment, species loss, overdevelopment, and then just kind of the expanding overexpansion of LA and how that, why we don't see more wildlife is because we're pushing into these places where, they do have mountain lions. Typically they have bears and foxes and all this stuff, but they've been pushed back because of, of the urban expansion. And then, again, sports, not having kids show up because they have asthma and because pollution and air quality is so poor that they can't show up to practice. So all of these things kind of shaped who I was in understanding the bigger role that we play in the environment, in particular how it relates to sports and recreation and going to the beach and seeing trash everywhere and being on a surfboard and having plastic bags and, the old 6-pack things getting, tied around the leash or even your foot. And if you've ever had one of those touch your foot in the middle of the ocean, it's not so much about the trash. It is an absolute freak out because you think, you don't know what's down there. You feel some touch your foot and the heart rate goes through the roof. And then you look down and you're like, oh, okay, it's a plastic bag. But
Yeah.
hey, I'm telling you what, there's nothing like a piece of trash touching your foot and thinking that's a little something nibbling.
Right.
Yeah, so that was it for me. It's just, I've been very fortunate to have access to these places. And I think that largely is part of the issue now is people having access, people having the opportunity to connect in those types of spaces is where we're lacking. I think we're going to continue to lack unless we increase access to natural spaces, more outdoor outdoor and environmental education.
And growing up, Chris, I know you probably were like Roger. Roger is a high level athlete. I think we all know that. For you growing up, I'm sure you played, especially in LA, you probably played a lot of different sports.
Yeah, so soccer was my sport growing up. Football and soccer were my sport. I think soccer was the first sport I took seriously and really saw that, I had some talent. Then I got into football and, playing at school. And then Wayne Gretzky coming in to the LA Kings in 92, 93. So then hockey went through the roof, and that combined that with the Mighty Ducks coming out. And Mighty Ducks, everybody thinks it's a great kids movie, but, for when we talk about like access and representation, that was a big thing for me is, there was only maybe one or two black hockey players. But the, Mighty Ducks having that representation, having the two black hockey players were like, dude, I want to play hockey.
Mhm.
And, with the practice facilities opening up close to my house, they opened up a place called, Isoplex and Rollerplex. So it was a roller and ice hockey complex. And so that's what I started doing and played those sports, continued through high school. And, that's why I'm a huge believer. Don't try to come at me with a specialized sport argument. Because I'm the wrong person for that. I think that everything that I did led me to be the baseball player that I was, especially with football. The amount of the skills, hand-eye coordination with all the other sports that I played is a huge factor in me being the athlete that I became.
So now, as you kind of, have that strong influence from your parents, your school, everything that's building, talk about that progression, from there and carrying the courage, that you had to speak up, to bring that change forward everywhere you went. So you went to Cincinnati and started it. Did you go to college and push that as well? Tell me
No,
about
no,
your
I didn't. It wasn't even a thing for me. I did the recycling and stuff like that, and we did, go to a beach cleanup and volunteer with Heal the Bay,
Mhm.
as a lot of people did, in Santa Monica. But, going through college, it wasn't till I went to Arizona Fall League in 2007. One of my best friends from high school was also living out there. We were roommates, and he had this book on the coffee table, and it was called "1,000 Ways We Can Save the Planet." And so just going through there and just looking at all these little antidotes and solutions and all these global issues that are happening, that kind of opened my eyes. So I really got deep into that. And it was just, it's a coffee table book. It was easily digestible. They're just kind of fun facts and figures. Actually, they weren't really fun. They're, frightening facts and figures.
Mhm.
And then this, again, this is all like a fortunate string of events. I ended up getting really sick. I ended up getting the flu that winter or New Year's. And so I didn't go out for New Year's. I stayed back and watched movies all night. And one of those movies was Inconvenient Truth. And that is really what propelled me way over the top. I was like, okay, I've had this background. I understand, the human impact and what we're doing, growing up. And now I see it on a global scale, what's happening, but also not just what's happening currently, but what is going to continue to happen if we don't do something now.
Mhm.
And learning about the history that this is something that has been put on the map 20 years prior, and looking at this window and understanding the gravity that this issue is, and just understanding the importance of what's happening. And so that kind of set me off. And then that year, 2008, that's when I was really into it. I started reading a lot of, started doing a lot of environmental research about what's happening with the oceans, what's happening with our air quality, with climate change. And then there was this great article that came out in Time magazine, written by, I should never forget this guy. Should never forget his name. It was called the hot, flat, and crowded.
Mhm.
Thomas Friedman. And he
Mhm.
wrote an article in Time magazine called "The Red, the White, and the Green," and why the United States needs a green revolution. And so it was, 40 pages of where we're at, where we need to be as far as infrastructure, sustainability, sustainable technology, sustainable energy, the whole 9 yards. And in between these chapters and portions of this article was a Brita ad, and that had a water bottle on a nightstand, and the water bottle said, 8 ounces of water equals a good night's sleep. 1 plastic water bottle equals 1,000 years in a landfill. And I'm like, wait, is that real? Then, back on the computer trying to research this, and sure enough, it was true. And you bring up all these materials and how long it takes to degrade in the natural environment. And then like 5 pages later is this ad for this water bottle for this stopglobalwarming.org. And that was Lori David's nonprofit, and they were campaigning against 350.org, which is to keep the carbon count at 350, because anything over 400, we're going to start to see the temperature change. So it was a whole campaign around that. And on this bottle is bright red letters, and it said, "I am not plastic." And I'm just like, okay, that needs to be something, because I'm sitting next to a 50-gallon trash can that was empty when I got here, and now is full of plastic within 3 hours, because we're in Louisville. It's the summer, and if you haven't been to Louisville in the summer, it is a different it is a different type of heat. Like, you throw out some Arizona 98 and then throw in some some southern humidity, and it becomes a very difficult climate to go out and take batting practice. So pitchers, hitters, you're going out with 4 or 5 water bottles. By the end of BP, the pitchers are out there shagging. They got water bottles everywhere. You're coming back, you're crushing water, plastic cups. These are getting thrown in regular trash. And then you come back, you get ready for a pregame, you rehydrate. And again, like, that trash can's full of plastic. I'm like, dude, the amount of plastic that we use in sport is crazy. And just looking at where plastic was at the point, it was like the cool thing, filtered water. And, it was the Nestle and Aquafina and Dasani and all this stuff. And like, bottled water became the cool thing. And so it was everywhere. And like, that was the cool thing in sports, is bottled water. And it was rampant. And so I sat down and I just started doing napkin math. I'm like, okay, if we're going through 1,500 bottles in a week here, what are we going through a year? And what is a minor league team going through that the big league team isn't going through, where they have 3 times the amenities? They have juice, Gatorade, muscle milk, supplements, all single-use plastic. And I'm like, this is a huge issue. So any given night in professional sports, you're looking at millions and millions of plastic bottles using. So I sent in a press inquiry into that water bottle company, and they sent us 50 bottles, because I wanted to see how much plastic we could cut down on. And people were, like you said, Roger, was very resistant. The good old boys from the South, California guys, were like, yeah, for sure.
Right.
Those good old boys from the South, they're like, oh man, what's one bottle going to do? Blah, blah, blah. Their F-250 out there, spewing out black smoke, which was bizarre too, because that good old boys are in fact the biggest environmentalists, because they hunt, being outdoors and preserving the health and integrity of the outdoors. So
that's a great point, Chris. But I do think you're right. It's like, when they really think about it, this is not just a political one-sided issue. It's really a human rights issue. And when people understand how it affects them, because they have families, right? They have a daughter like yours, right? They have kids and grandparents. And when they really understand the impact, when we have that common knowledge and awareness, people do jump on board, and we can put our differences aside and really galvanize around the true issues, and when you want to protect nature and you want to understand how you preserve, clean air and clean water, everybody wants that. Everybody needs that. Everybody deserves that. And I think that is a common ground. But you being bold and brave to take that into a community that's not their natural conversation or instinct, and helping them understand that was monumental. When I think about where you landed from Cincinnati, minor league, Louisville, that whole thing. And that's kind of the same area and path that I've kind of geographically have been in as well, and fought the battles in a different way on the corporate level, at Yum Brands, and how that relates to all our operations around the world through supply chain and et cetera. So being a good corporate steward and a good corporate citizen relates to those common needs of the community, which is clean air, clean water, and protecting our biodiversity and nature. So I think that's fantastic that we had that overlap, at the same time. Even though we didn't know it, you were operating, kind of at that level, and I was operating at a different level for the same, same causes.
Yeah, and the narrative around that is like, oh, here we go, the California, like the hippie, tree hugger. Like I was the tree, I'm like, bro, you go duck hunting every off season. Like, if this were to completely fall apart, then what would you, then what would you have? You know what I'm saying? So it's just, it was a weird thing for particularly, with that area, that demographic. Like they look at anybody who cares about the environment or speaks about it as like, this tree hugger, California hippie. And so I was fine with that, but that's one of those things you just kind of had to ignore for a number of years. But that's one of those things where you have to break it down. And I think sports can do that. It's like, if we're not talking about like, let's just take climate out of it. But the fact of the matter is like, this river's polluted. This is how it affects your area. This is how it affects all the, the creatures in this particular area. All right, look at this plastic. This is where plastic goes. This is where plastic goes. This is what happens when you're dumping, you're dumping chemicals and you have this type of pollution into, into the lakes. And we're like, oh, wow, I love taking, everybody loves taking their summers to go to the lake, to go, jet ski, to go fish. And like, this is how it affects it. So all in all, like we might approach it differently, but it affects all of us if we're not responsible.
What was your biggest impact? And, before I throw it back to Alex, when you think about that journey and leveraging your platform and then finally getting everybody to understand what that meant, that was a journey. What were your biggest impact in either Louisville, Cincinnati, or for the Reds, or as you move forward before, launching Players for the Planet? Talk about those impacts.
I think going into that 09 season, I think that was the biggest impact when it really, they took it in, they adopted it, and gave me the freedom to suggest things, but them being able to put it, to apply it, that was the biggest impact. And that, with the Reds being able to apply all of these different factors, that became the blueprint for Players for the Planet moving forward. So I think it was that 09 season, that seventh inning recycling drive, that education, that reading program, the reusable bag program that we did with Safeway, or is it Safeway? Is that no? Is it Safeway? They're the big.
You got one Safeway. Kroger.
Who's that Cincinnati? Who's that big time Cincinnati grocery store?
Kroger's big.
Kroger. Yeah. So doing that program, doing the giveaways, that set the tone for, all right, how are we able to educate fans? How can we apply these? How can we get partners to push this in their surrounding businesses, like coming into a Kroger and getting those reusable bags as part of the Reds promotion, going to the library and having an assortment of climate and environmental books to educate the next generation, looking at our e-waste and how we function and how we use, how we dispose of things, and the education and the larger issue behind it. That became the blueprint. And so then moving forward, it wasn't until 2018 really that we started really attacking ocean plastic. But the Reds had done several, even when I got traded, they did several of those e-waste events even after I left. They continue to do the recycling program. They continue to do the education programs long after I left. So very fortunate that my legacy in the program of what they adopted and allowed us to work with lasted even when I was gone. And then, that 2018, when I had finished playing, really could focus, all my energy on Players for the Planet, addressing the ocean plastic and just the plastic crisis in general, going down the Dominican after that, the CNN video, being able to partner with Parlay. But then I had established myself in the organization, was like, players knew what I was trying to do. And so we're like, oh yeah, I love what you do. And so having the athlete continue to grow and grow and grow, football, baseball, basketball, MLS, NHL players, really with those personalities within the clubhouse, and the word of mouth of what we were doing just kind of exploded. And to the degree of the unfortunate degree too, is that really you Roger, it's like you had that kind of that threshold where it's like, all right, this is kind of just a thing where you went through the whole go green, everybody go green, all right, we're going to make our stuff with 5% less plastic, and we're going to make this bottle with recycled plastic caps. Like, that didn't move the needle. It was just a buzzword. And then 2016, 2017, we really started to see the larger effects of what's happening. So you take those younger generations that are growing up with this, and they're like, yo, we have a real problem. So then we just started getting a ton of attention from around the sports world, particularly athletes that were like, all right, I'm down with the oceans. Like, I'm against plastic. I want to do tree planting. They're cutting down the forest. This is on fire. The temperature is going crazy here. That's when things all became coming to a head. And a lot of that is because social media and accessibility, which is super important. But that, going into that, and then, doing everything we did with Parlay for the Oceans, and having those athletes come down to the Dominican, and really looking at these places that we really love, that everybody loves, is the ocean, is the oceans. And, understanding that every third breath that we take is, the oceans is responsible for. So
absolutely. Yeah, that's a great connection.
That was definitely it.
Absolutely. Passing it back to you, Alex, your thoughts.
Yeah. So was it 2018 that Players for the Planet officially started? Because you've been building
2009. No, after we got the attention coming when I made my big league debut. So the cool thing about my big league debut is when I got back my first home game in Cincinnati, this had already been built up. It had already been covered by ESPN, MLB.com, a number of different sports outlets, that what we were doing in Louisville with the bottles, and like trying to cut down on the amount of plastic. So by the time I got called up, when I got to Cincinnati, my first game in Great American Ballpark, I had people with like fan club signs, like with the recycling symbol on them. And so they had like the planet Earth colored on it, and like a recycling symbol. And they're like, yeah, go green, blah, blah, blah. And so I'm like, okay. And that was like, all right, this is something that it's not just me. Like, even here in the Midwest, this is something that has been brought to people's attention, and they care about. What if I can get more athletes? And so at the same time, Matt Castle, who was, starting quarterback in Kansas City at the time, a number of NHL players that have been very vocal about, the climate changing with the ice, with their ice melting faster and freezing later. Tay's trying to distract me with a poster. Here, you want to show it?
Go ahead, Taylor. Put her in there. Oh, all right. Love it. She's your star. That's your why, right? That's your why, right?
Yeah, well, yeah. And so, we'll get to the influence of kids, but you've seen her in action, and like that is the why. But so that, getting those athletes, getting those first 10, 15 athletes from, the AVP tour, we're like, okay, let's do this. Like, what do we call it? And so it was originally called We Play Green. And that was at the time that Houston was doing a similar campaign with waste management in Houston. So we got a cease and desist called Play Green. So we got a cease and desist letter on our name, We Play Green. So we ended up having to change it once we incorporated and filed a 501c3, and we ended up coming with Players for the Planet. But we operated as We Play Green for like 2 years. And then eventually we changed it. So yeah, 2009 is when we were officially an organization. And that year I spoke at the UN with a number of other athletes from around the world. Natalie Spilger, who is a soccer player in the Women's Professional Soccer League, who's doing something similar with green laces. They were laces made of recycled plastic. Sean White. There were individuals. There was a French rower that I'll never forget, because she was one of the first to stumble upon the garbage patch, or one of the garbage patches. She was trying to row across the channel, and basically she was trying to set this world record. And off in the distance, she kept seeing all these weird colors, these speckles of colors. And as she went further into it, she just started to notice all this trash floating by. And so that was another aha moment, is being around these other athletes to understand what's happening on the ground around the world, that just wasn't local to us, but how it's affecting sport around the globe.
And Chris, did you ever have a challenges? I'm sure you always have challenges, but the balance between being a professional baseball player and really pushing this players for the planet?
Yeah, it always, and you guys know, like, it's nothing is more politicized than climate change, the hoax, blah, 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 call it whatever you want. But so I learned that very early, that I didn't have to get into like the whole climate change and like the doom and gloom thing. I'm just taking it from the sports standpoint, like as what we're doing with overconsumption, with plastic production, with the way we get to and from stadiums, the way we get home, looking at alternative transportation, looking at carpooling, looking at solutions as humans and how we operate on a daily basis. That's what I focus on. And then to look at, the consequences, and then to use sports to frame the consequences of our actions on a daily basis without getting into that whole thing. So that's always been a challenge for most athletes. Even today, it's a huge challenge. They don't want to speak out about it because it's become such a political divider. That was the great separation. I was just like, okay, let's just look at it from this. There's massive deforestation happening in these areas, forest fires, because of mismanagement, but having the opportunity to bring sports together to go out and to rescue and to replenish these areas, to clean up these areas, and using athletes, because everybody wants to be around athletes and be influential. So if Joey Votto and 3 other players are going to be at a tree planting, like, you're going to get a huge turnout. Yep. And indirectly, even if it wasn't something that you're particularly interested about, being there and understanding is going to send you home with a completely different perspective on our natural environment. And I'll never forget one of the events that we did with the St. Louis Cardinals with our Play for Trees program. Paul had committed, I think, $150 for every base hit. So by the end of the year, I think he had committed almost like $8,000, which was like, it was a significant amount of trees. And so going into one of the most beloved parks in St. Louis, and then having the St. Louis staff come out, it was probably like 40 staff members. And we went to Chick-fil-A after, and I can remember like that feeling. Like, I never forget that feeling of the positivity that they were emitting, like having the opportunity to get out there and like get their hands dirty and like give back to the natural environment, to plant these trees, knowing that this is something that's going to outlive them forever. It's going to provide so much for natural wildlife, but it's going to provide green spaces for their kids and generations to come.
Raj, I got one more question here.
Yeah, you go.
I was thinking about this while you were talking. So looking at all the things you've done and going back to your time in LA and your dad getting you started with recycling, and the story you talked about, how you build the recycle, and looking at, Roger McClendon and, Roger, his father, the impact his father had on him, and my father had a huge impact on me. And all 3 of us are, I think, doing great things for community environment. What does your father think now, looking at what you're doing?
But yeah, I wouldn't go down that road. My dad drank the Trump Kool-Aid.
Oh,
so no. Yeah.
I'm sorry. I didn't know.
Yeah.
I wasn't prepared for that.
Yeah. So he's one of those guys. So that's kind of like, I wouldn't say it's a sore subject. It's just kind of, it is what it is. That's the battle. And it's unfortunate that, I have it in the family.
Yeah.
But I think that, I never asked him about why he put the recycling system together. Yeah, I never asked him why. It was just something that was just taught to me, and just being in California, also just being progressive. It's something that was being implemented citywide. We had the black trash bin, the blue trash bin, and then we had, we already had the separate trash bin, the green bin for compost. So early on, it was just like, it's just, you know, how you were raised. But, you know, eventually my dad started to shift that way.
Yeah.
And so,
Yeah.
Yeah.
you know, I'm sure he's proud of me on, you know, just, you know, the community involvement and, you know, trying to protect our natural environment. But I think his political views on like climate and, you know, getting away from like coal and, you know, electric, you know, all that stuff, the progressive moving towards a more progressive infrastructure with, you know, more sustainable technologies and renewables. I don't think he's on
Yeah.
board
Yeah.
with that.
I think that the segue, you know, is, you know, we have you here, Chris, representing People and Planet Champions, because you are a People Planet champion. I mean, you are doing it for the next generation, and you are a lover of, you know, nature, right? And that's what we talk about, the animals that can't defend themselves. When we think about the ocean and what that means for our survival, right? That people don't think about every day in their everyday lives, but it's so important that we do have these champions. That's where we're at today. I mean, Alex does his I'm Important program, which I really love, you know, where he's reaching out to these young people to help them understand why they are important, the things that they do care about, and the power that they do have to make a difference. So I guess my question is, like, you know, how do we move forward regardless of, you know, what support we may or may not have, or what the administration is or is not? You know, it still kind of relies on us of what we can do every day to make a difference. And that's why I'm so excited about this call, because I love the power that you guys and the influence that you guys have. It inspires me to keep going as well. So what do you think? What's next, Chris?
You know, we probably need a whole nother episode as to where we're at. You know, because I think on our pre-call when we discussed this, it's, you know, we're at a boiling point. I think, you know, doing the documentary on, you know, that we did in Hawaii that, you know, is focusing on ocean plastic, but really understanding the, you know, again, looking at the consequences from the political side. You know, it's just like, all right, we're gonna make plastic okay, and we're gonna ramp up plastic, but on the ground is we don't have those access. Those stories are untold, and I think that's why, you know, this coming out is going to be so incredibly fulfilling, is to bring those stories to light. And I think we need to make those stories more of a priority. And Raj, you know this better than anybody, is that, you know, if we're going to really get sports to get on board, it comes from ownership. It comes from our government. It comes from our local municipalities. You know, we're looking at LA 28 coming down the line in 2 years. And, you know, we're learning about that there's, you know, half the stuff, you know, half the recycling doesn't get recycled because the infrastructure is not in place, and the amount of food waste that's created. There's only 2 municipal systems, composting systems in all of LA County. And so just looking at this, we're actually so far behind, and we can only do so much. Like LA Compost is an incredible program. They'll come pick up your food waste scraps. They do local composting, but it's not at the scale that needs to happen. You know, New York is doing an incredible job right now. If you go and you go around New York, and these massive piles of compost, you know, under the subway, and they're doing those pickup programs. And so hopefully bringing those are the types of programs that we need, but it has to come from the top. We're going to set the standard. We're going to be the gold standard in how we build this building, what the amenities, what the education, the materials, the resources that are given to our fans, and the education, and then using that platform and the captive audience every night, 15, 20, 25, 30,000 fans, is having the opportunity to educate our fans on, you know, what's happening and how they can take best practices home. And that starts with ownership, because we're going to continue to fight as people. We're going to have cleanup groups. You're going to have the One Tree Planted and all these that are doing reforestation, they're doing beach cleanups, education, conservation work. But to, you know, widespread, to make this part, we need a lot more than that, and it's going to have to come from the top.
Mm-hmm. Alex, that's to you, man. I know you're thinking about buying a team or owning one of these teams. So
I don't know about that. Chris, so all right, here's the situation. You are getting onto an elevator. All right. You got to go up to the 20th floor. And you get on the elevator with two people that very influential, both money and resources. They look at you and they see a T-shirt that says "Players for the Planet," and one of them says, "What is that?" How do you succinctly explain that and explain that to people you think about it that really aren't in that world, don't really get a good grasp and understand some of those concepts, you know? So what do you say going to the 20th floor?
Yeah, Players for the Planet is a collection of professional athletes that are advocating for environmental good, and we're using sports as our platform to put a microscope on the issues that are happening around the world and how it, in the future will prohibit our enjoyment of sports and entertainment as we know it, whether you're a spectator, at the stadium or you're training. And it is a collection of athletes that are really passionate about preserving their natural environment and really preserving their sport and having be able to tell their story, but also getting their active participation in events, whether it be reforestation, ocean conservation, is to use their energy, their notoriety, and their voice to bring more attention, but also to educate the next generation of athletes and sports fans to go home with with best practices. Being able to be that constant voice to just demand better of our fellow humans. And it's a global issue, and sports is a global thing, and there's nothing that brings together people together like sports. It's when people step in stadiums, it becomes a very non-political environment that transcends any type of politics. We're there for sport, for our entertainment, but for our country and team, city pride. And so if we can put that type of pride towards something, we can take that same pride and apply it to our communities and how we operate within them to create the best possible future.
Love it.
And who are give me three athletes that you work with that you say are really boots on the ground, exemplify what you want to accomplish?
Colton Wong's definitely one. I mean, we literally created a whole, an hour and a half documentary around. It's an interesting story because it encapsulates everything that's great about Players for the Planet, is having somebody who's from a unique place that we often think is so amazing, but be able to highlight the severity of an issue on a particular place that we have a completely different perception of, then be able to tell a story to educate those through something that can be done on the field, such as a pair of custom cleats, having the impact on ESPN Sunday Night Baseball to create that conversation, to create this narrative, this attention, and then using sport to filter that in to the storytelling and getting someone to understand their situation, what they're living with, what's happening to their home, and then getting the support to then go out and create like a massive film. And so that's what happened with Kuliana and Colton is wearing those cleats, being able to educate people about Camilo Beach, the plastic beach, the Great Pacific Garbage Patch, and then looking at the global issue of plastic and ocean conservation. So I think that's definitely one of the best examples. I think Sasha Dugulian, world-class rock climber, what she's been able to do, use her platform with her show on Outdoor Network, dedicating an entire episode with us in the Dominican with ocean plastic, going to the Arctic and seeing that plastic is being found in the ice up there, and then constantly advocating, lobbying, going to the White House, lobbying for restrictions on protected areas, and on really using this collective of people who live and thrive in the outdoors to advocate for the further protection. Oh, and then Lauren Barnes, the NWSL, everything that she's done in the sport, she's the longest tenured player of the NWSL, and basically just she's going to retire at the end of the year. But what she's done within the sport, as far as looking at how we operate as athletes, the materials that we use, how we're collecting, how we're responsible over, our everyday choices, whether it be taking reusables, watching what we're eating with plastic, looking at, the plant-based diets and why it's beneficial for, the environment, but also looking at how we, the stuff that we put in, the stuff that we drink out of, how we're disposing of our athletic gear, and how we can bring together, athletes and fellow NWSL players to create programs of reuse, repurpose. Those are the types of people that have played the biggest impact. But also from the ground, everybody has their own different thing that they're trying to achieve, and I think that's kind of those three are kind of the heartbeat of Players for the Planet. Is be able to take that education, that passion, and go out and put themselves out there to try to create these programs within their own communities and their own sport.
Love it, love it, love it. So that's the momentum that we see building. I think that's really important that these leaders, when is the doc supposed to come out? The documentary is supposed to release.
So we're going to do their impact campaign over the next couple months, and then hopefully by February, March, it'll be available on a streaming service and ready to watch globally.
All right.
Yeah. Well, Roger, I've got some quick questions, quick answers for Chris. Okay.
Go
Chris,
for it.
You ready, Chris?
Ready.
All right. Okay. If you could meet one person that you've never met before, dead or alive, who would it be and why?
I'm alive. I don't think it'd be one particular person. I'll tell you where I'm at now. I would love to be able to go to and just live within a Native American or an indigenous population, just for like a couple weeks, just to understand and learn about the history of the earth, and like living off the earth. They basically invented democracy, 500 years ago here in this country, but also just how, and then, very similar to Hawaii, how everything was so incredibly sustainable, these complex systems of sustainability so long ago. I find that really fascinating because we've gotten so far from it. I would love to hear those stories and be able to connect with that type of philosophy.
In your opinion, who has the best MLB uniforms or hat of all time? And I want to start it off. All right. Expos, the old school Expos hat, the red, white, and blue, and the Brewers.
Great documentary too.
The Brewers hat was fire because the M and the B made the mitt. That's some good stuff right there.
Yeah.
All right,
it really was. Yeah. Hold on 1 second.
Uh-oh. I feel like
he going to the closet. He going to the closet.
Yeah, we're going to the closet.
We struck a nerve here. We got something here. Yes.
Oh.
Yes, that Brewers hat.
This right here, yes. And there's a reason that I hung on to this. It's super classic, and I was so excited to have the opportunity, with the throwback uniforms. And this has always been one of my favorite hats. I'm definitely taking this home. But this is a classic logo. The Expos is all-time classic. And then when we're talking hockey, the Hartford Whalers, classic unis with the whale tail. But as far as uniforms, I just don't think it gets better than the pure white, the Dodgers uniforms. The Dodger uniform, the Dodger all white. Yankee pinstripes, can't beat Yankee pinstripes, and probably the old school baby blue Kansas City, or any of the baby blue Kansas City, Toronto, even the Mariners, old school Mariners uniforms.
Yep, good answers there. Okay, my last question here. 5 years from now, what will Chris Dickerson be doing?
I don't even know what I'm going to be doing in like 6 months.
We got a forecast here. What we got going on?
Yeah, man, that's a good question. That's a good question because, I just talked to I've been mentoring the Stanford sports and sustainability class for the last three and a half years, and it was a class that was originally started. And Raj, this was an interesting story because Green Sports Alliance had, when it was virtual, had a college, like a college breakout room.
Mm-hmm.
So any of these college kids that were interested in getting into sports sustainability from all over the country, would be able to go in and be like, hey, how can I get into this? What are we doing on campus? How can we apply this? And how can we prepare ourselves to get into a profession within sports and sustainability? And so I went into this group, not necessarily but to speak to them. And we ended up starting a Players for the Planet, like student athlete volunteer group. And in this group, there were 4 Stanford students. And these 4 Stanford students were the head of their, the campus sustainability program. And after, I think, a year working with us and Players for the Planet, they went on to start this very class, this sports and sustainability class at Stanford. And so every year I go up to Stanford and speak to the class. And I talked to them last Thursday, and was just, very candid about, because they asked the same question. It was like, oh, what have you been up to? And I didn't really have much from the Players for the Planet side, because it's, Raj, it's one of those things where I said it's about leadership and really finding, these leagues ultimately has to come from the top down. Other than that, you kind of sustainability falls so low on the totem pole.
Mm-hmm.
And, it's military, it's veteran, it's education, it's access to food and health and exercise, and then at the bottom is sustainability. So after our MLB partnership and doing a number of events in the off season, it kind of took a step back. We focused on the documentary. So looking at that 6 months, that 8 months of that transition of really trying to assess where we're at, what sustainability looks like at the pro level, at the college level, and just kind of where we fit into all of it with advocacy. And there's so many things, and I'll always be an advocate of bettering our natural environment. But who knows, after the documentary, I could be like, traveling around my own TV show talking about the environment, or, who knows? But, whether I'd love to get into broadcasting, would love to stay in sports marketing. So I related 5 months. I'm looking at, where am I going to be in like a year rather than 5 years? But I know 5 years, I'll always be an advocate, Tay, and I will always be out, planting trees and trying to do, doing my best to where I can build her into, a little advocate that can be, at school and telling stories in her STEM class and her science class about, the importance of our environment and leading by example. So I think that's really my 5-year plan is, as a parent, is to really be that, to help this next generation, her generation, become advocates, but also, continue to be out there connecting with athletes and bringing these types of stories to life.
Chris, it's been an honor, and really a privilege to kind of have you centered and featured as a People Planet champion. You exude what it really means, and the idea, kind of fits into your DNA, and it's a pleasure and an honor to have you on and tell your story, and to continue to be a part, collaborative part of your journey. I think the same way with Alex. So I know within the 5-year time frame, we'll be back together in some fashion, form,
Sure.
some way, making an impact, whether it's I'm important or where you go, Chris, or what we do together. So again, I thank you for spending the time with us and sharing your journey so far.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Yeah, and just like you said, it's never going to escape us. We're always going to be advocates. We're always going to be connectors of solutions. That's never going to stop it.
Absolutely. So I know Alex speaks a little Spanish. Hablo español poquito myself. So, we will have to go out and check out the Dominican next time you go. Maybe we could be guests out there to help out with a beach cleanup or something. So, we're behind you. We're supportive. And, we're going to get this podcast out and to continue to push you and your, really your legacy, continue to push your legacy forward. So thanks again for participating on this podcast, Alex.
Yeah, absolutely.
I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you so much for your time to be on the People and Planet Champion podcast. Let's make sure we stay in touch, man. I'll be in LA, I think, after the New Year. So definitely try to connect up. If you need anything from me, I'll be out there for about a week. So Roger can Perfect. Pop up anytime he wants.
I'm just hanging with Alex. He's my man.
We want to thank everybody for listening to episode 3 of the People and Planet Champions podcast.
Sports Pro, Alex Meacham with a all pro, Roger McClendon.